5th of September, and the Bow Club is watching something, or some of the Bow Club members are here, and we're at the Shuttleworth collection.
Now this Burton Row, AV Row, on special flying at Gosport. And Major Smith Barry was a celebrated pioneer airman who damaged himself quite badly in a crash. Invented a new system of training called the Gosport training, which is still in use today. Standardized pattern, it's standardized for Gosport tubes, which you can communicate with the pupil, and the system of patter is virtually unchanged to this day. Now this aircraft, the Tutor, I say in the mid-20s, tender was put out for a new trainer to succeed the 504. It was on the 504, incidentally, that the first member of the British royal family learnt to fly, the man who was later King George VI. To those military, and a lot of the rest for export. There were quite a lot of changes before the final version came out into service. Had the 215 horsepower Lynx engine, new fin and rudder, then became known as the Tutor. Wheeled happily backbursters. One with this next item. Trevor Roche flying the Bristol F2B, Bristol fighter, one of the more handsome of the aeroplanes in the collection, Rolls-Royce Falcon engine. And it's not a good idea. They came into service in 1917. The pattern of air fighting on the Western Front was a sort of, I'm not quite sure it was a sine curve or a fugue guide. I suppose as we won, it was probably a decaying fugue guide. At any given moment, either we or the Germans were on top. For a lot of the time, the Germans had better aircraft. They had better ideas, as did the French, of handling aircraft offensively. Trenchard was a man of very far vision, but few ideas. He was wedded to the idea, quite correctly, that his service existed to be the eyes of the army, and to fly and to fight to keep the army going, to support it in every way it could. As this comes past, you can probably see that the whole fuselage is planked in plywood. Now, as British pilots found out, here's the Bristol fighter now in a standard attacking position, weaving to stay away from the observer's but present not too good a target to the observer with his parabellum. At a very cautious distance, that's a long range out for a World War I combat, because those German two-seaters were very well handled. And, as I say, it's a great planked with plywood. And very solid. It's very difficult indeed to destroy a tea chest with a machine gun. What it comes down to. And they were aggressively handled. Yes. That's not our topic pub, that is the Tiger Moth going off again. Classic example in latter days, of course, is the Tiger Moth. And unless you've got assistance, and certainly if you're on concrete, not grass, the only way to control a Tiger Moth at a crosswind is to get out of it and walk through the Royal Aircraft Establishment Aero Club at Farnborough, a club which is still going. They were too light and too low powered for civilian use, so it didn't come to any very much. But this, the lone survivor, was found less an engine in a shed near Deal by squadron leader Jackson, who was then the manager of the collection here, the great Jacko. And it was restored by the de Havilland Technical School at Hatfield. De Havilland. This Grosvenor House. The last survivor and the most famous of the great racing comets of 1934, and the McRobertson race from England to Australia. Beautifully restored, in the hands of various professional restorers. Flying until quite recently, some of you may have seen it either flying here or at Farnborough with a Mosquito some years ago, and hopefully we shall see those days again when we get room to operate it. In the meantime, there's Grosvenor House. 6 were built, 3 were built for the race, the others came along afterwards. 1 hours, 18 seconds. That's 60 hours, 50 minutes, 18 seconds flying time. And you can imagine sitting in that cramped cockpit with a very noisy, very tricky, very tiring aeroplane to fly. No modern instrumentation. You had radio, if you were lucky in those days. Radio took up space and weight. But you had nothing else. You'd know very little way blind flying or anything of that sort. Flew very successfully. And then stored for 30 years before it was handed over in 1967 to the collection. And it was restored to flying condition in the old Warden workshops here, which are operated almost entirely, as I said earlier, by voluntary aid from the SVAS, beg its pardon. And it flew again in 1971. It hasn't flown now for a year or so. I hope one day we shall see it flying again. DC for some time, and it was donated in 1947 by the squadron to the Shuttleworth. I'm a member of the SVAS. I'm Mr. Dowson and his family. In 1925, very similar to the earlier models from 1919. Production stopped in 1930 largely because the firm burnt down, which is one reason for stopping production. Of the aircraft was 757 feet. He's got a jolly good altimeter on that chap. And there were the two nearest were both at 750 feet. And there was a second draw to decide which one, single and two-seat light aircraft, to encourage private flying. The emphasis was on economy, and produced as a result a number of brilliant designs, but only moderately successful. They were very underpowered, and also handicapped by the uncertain behavior of the engines. Now, one of the designers who had entered an aeroplane was Geoffrey de Havilland, the Hummingbird, which you've seen already. And he won an Air Ministry contract. At the two-seater competition, confirmed his opinion on this. And he built a sensible two-seater biplane, the first of all the moths. Actually, there was an interim three-seater, the DH-51, which was too heavy, too powerful and too expensive, but he turned up with the first of all the moths. And it was powered by an engine designed by the great Major Halford, which essentially was one half of a Renault V8 wartime engine, of which there were an awful lot left over, with a new crankcase. And the result, there's one still flying of these original moths, and that's the one leading out our procession this afternoon. EBLV, the first of all the moths with the ADC Cirrus engine.
Took on Halford as a consultant and started his own engine company. And the result of that was that the next moth, the third one taking off now, the Shuttleworth's own original moth, has the first of the great Gypsy engines, the Havilland Gypsy engine, designed by Halford, who had a lot of experience by then, at Shuttleworth. And over 1,400 of them were built. That's got our moth. The white moth, incidentally, was restored and belonged to Peter Howell and his brother, who were well-known racing drivers. And when Peter Howell died, sadly, his widow presented the aircraft to the collection. His brother is still very much alive, I'm delighted to say, and in very good form, and I saw him quite recently at the Vintage Sports Car Club's hill climb at Prescott. This particular Railton, incidentally, well, the moths are on the far side of the circuit. A 1937 straight 8, the 4.2 litre, 28 horsepower, capable of over the ton, belonged to Richard Shuttleworth, who was a director of Railton and was kept on after his death by his mamma. There's the Mughal. Think of Alex Headshaw taking off from a stony desert stretch at night with paraffin flares, grossly overloaded with petrol, heading non-stop from that point to the Cape in that aeroplane. Dave Mackay and the Shuttleworth Spitfire will be giving the closing display of the show later on. 9 Polish Squadron markings. Service with the RAF. A mixture of guns. Originally had 2 Vickers and the fuselage, which still had to be placed so the pilot could get at the breeches with a hammer in case they jammed. World War I again. And 2 Lewis guns with drums which could be reloaded under the wings. Later became the first RAF fighter to be equipped with the Colt Browning. Most excellent gun, which was the gun, of course, which won the Battle of Britain. Developed out of the slightly bigger Gauntlet, and the last of a long line of very celebrated aeroplanes which came under the design leadership, although he wasn't really involved in the Gladiator to any great extent, of the great Harry Folland. The last aeroplane with his ideas in it. And the first famous production fighter designed by Harry Folland is also here on the airfield today, and that's the SE-5. In between, there were a long line of neat biplane fighters with radial engines, all looking more or less like this. The initial ones for the British Newport Company and then for Gloucester. 2 squadrons of Gladiators went to France in 1939. Its greatest claims to fame, of course, were in the Middle East, where it dogfighted. And there's a sight for you.
mounted on the undercarriage, that huge one-piece casting that forms the undercarriage, held bombs or containers of whatever sort you wanted, and the Lysander's low flying capabilities and the ability to carry a lot of stores like that, easily loaded, made it ideal for air sea rescue. Subsequently very famous, the Black Lysanders, for its work of 3 squadrons engaged this bell. And that's all you need to know about Spitfire.
Over there.
Followed it too far, did you?